want to start out by pointing out we totally agree with that first plate that Governor Stitt put out there with the language from Part 15B. That's public record. Go out and read it for yourselves. Governor Stitt only read the first clause, and what it actually says is the first term expires January 1, 2020, and there's a lot of language that follows it. The most immediate question the state has never been able to answer for us is how do they make sense of the clause in there that says shall automatically renew. Governor Stitt didn't mention that in his meeting today. This has been an issue for tribal leaders since the beginning. And let's be clear, there was no outreach before Governor Stitt sent his letter dated July 5. There was no outreach before the Tulsa World editorial ran on July 8. There were a handful of phone calls made to a couple of tribal leaders the weekend before the op-ed ran. I'm bringing that up just for context. For the tribal leaders, this is an issue of right and wrong. The state offered a compact to the tribes 15 years ago. The tribes accepted that compact. They have abided every word of that compact. And now in the 11th hour, the state of Oklahoma is trying to create uncertainty. Governor Stitt talked quite a bit today about uncertainty. The only uncertainty is that which he is trying to put over a negotiation table as a leverage play. That's unfortunate. Tribal leaders deserve better than that. Oklahoma deserves better than that. Governor Stitt talks about this isn't about the tribes, it's about the casino operators. I'm scratching my head trying to figure out who the casino operators are. The state of Oklahoma has compacts with tribal governments here in Oklahoma. The tribal governments operate those casinos, and the state of Oklahoma, pursuant to federal law, has no right to regulate those tribes or their activities. Instead, under federal law, we engage in a compact negotiation and we come up with terms by which we abide. I think it's kind of interesting that we're standing in front of this Hauser statue that's entitled, "And Still the Waters Flow." I'm not trying to bring up past injustices, but for tribal leaders who respond to political constituencies here in Oklahoma, these are folks who are familiar with governments not keeping their word. So when the state government rather arbitrarily chooses to cherry pick language out of a compact and disregard the rest of the terms, that's problematic. The tribal leaders have been consistent and very unified since day one in all of this, which is stop trying to create this uncertainty, stop trying to make a leverage play, sit down as partners, and we will work this out. We can figure out the deal. As far as what triggers renewal, the state's goal in 2004 was to save the horse racing industry. Go back and do your own research on that. We can give you sources. If you read the language of Part 15, that reference to organization licensees, that's a defined term, it's a statutory term. That's referring to the horse tracks. If you go back to the legislative debates in 2003, 2004, we have members of the state legislature in this very building standing on the floor saying as long as the electronic gaming is still being conducted at the horse tracks, these compacts will automatically renew for another term. On October 17 this year, the Oklahoma Horse Racing Commission relicensed Fair Meadows, Remington Park, Will Rogers Downs. Those are the organization licensees that will be conducting electronic gaming next year. The compact renews. There's no reasonable argument that it doesn't. So the concerns that the tribal leaders have put on the table is abide the terms and let's work as partners to figure out what the right thing to do next is. As far as the rates, you brought up New York rates. Now that was interesting. Yeah, New York is one of, there's about 14 compacts out of 306 compacts that states have with tribes in this country. 14 compacts in total have a revenue share rate of between 20 and 25%. The maximum rate in our compact is 10%. That puts us among the company of 92% of the other compacts have a rate of around that or less. He said that no other casino that looks like, and he showed a picture, I couldn't see it, no other casino that looks like this pays a lower rate. That's just categorically not true. I invite you all to go travel to Mystic Lake, go visit the tribal casino right there in downtown Minneapolis, Minnesota. 0 revenue share rate, perpetual compact, never expires. So we want to have a conversation based on the facts, not based on selected examples that might support a position or not. But let's talk about New York. New York has a 25% rate. The state of New York has a population of about 5 times that of Oklahoma. And they only have a handful, there's only a couple of gaming tribes there. They have a median household income that's 30% higher than here in Oklahoma. It's a different market. Would the governor propose that we pay the state income tax as every other state in the country? That we pay the same sales tax in every other state? No. You have to take into consideration policy goals, market considerations. It's not just pulling a lever in one state should be the same as pulling a lever in another state. These are sophisticated issues, and the tribal leaders are looking for a sophisticated conversation. The question was asked about whether the tribes are willing to pay more. The tribes have already contributed substantially to the state. If you go back to 2004, the state's projections for what it was going to make under the gaming compacts from the tribal revenue share was about $55 million a year. You adjust that for inflation, you're talking about $850 million over the first term of the compact. The tribes have paid $1.6 billion under the compact. Some might say, well, the industry's bigger, so the tribes should pay more. Well, that's the beauty of percentages. When the tribes do better, the state does better. One might ask, well, what do they pay in Nevada? Nevada, one of the biggest gaming locations in the world. The commercial gaming tax rate, not directly applicable, but just for analogy, 6.75%. There's a lot of economics involved in this. We can have these discussions, and I think the tribes are proud of what they do. They're looking for the state to just abide the terms of the deal, to do what's right.
If there's not a new compact in place by January 1st, what happens?
Right now, all we have is Governor Stitt's position that the compact's expired. That is a position. The tribes are unified in their position that the compacts are new, and they're going to continue to operate. The plain language of the compact supports our position. The history of the compact supports our position. If Governor Stitt wants to force the issue, and I would ask the question of why, if the tribes are willing to have a conversation about rates, you can just set the renewal issue aside, what purpose is served? He would have to go to court. He'd have to try to get some type of order to shut the casinos down. Barring that, we're just going to continue to operate, and we're going to continue remitting our revenue share payments to the state. We're going to continue to grow, as we've been doing for the past 15 years.
Quick question. He was talking about the uncertainty that this creates, but yet isn't there information out there that banks are continuing to...
The Cheyenne Arapaho just recently signed their deal with Bank of America for a multi-million-dollar expansion for their gaming facility. The Osage Nation, Choctaw Nation, Chickasaw Nation, we're all proceeding with expansions right now. We're largely doing it through investment relationships or financing relationships or self-financing. But the market isn't reflecting the risk that Governor Stitt is attempting to manufacture. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but the only uncertainty is that which is coming out of his office. He was standing there by himself. Everyone else seems pretty certain that the compacts renew. And we would like to return to a good relationship where we're working together and we can figure out opportunities for both the state and the tribes to continue to do better. But we've got to do it with a healthy relationship.
What's your name and title?
My name is Stephen Greetham, Stephen with a P-H-E-N. Greetham, G-R-E-E-T-H-A-M as in Mary, senior counsel for the Chickasaw Nation.
Mr. Greetham, we've talked about this a little bit before, but tribal attorneys and chiefs have made statements in the past to the fact that the compacts do come up for renegotiation in 2020. Now, come up versus don't automatically renew is a different deal, but he referenced the letter from the Osage Nation chief, I believe, in 2016, talking about how, as you know, that the compacts expire in 2020. Was he wrong? Is that your legal opinion?
I've worked in Indian country long enough to never say another tribal leader is wrong.
I would right.
Well, go look at Chief Standing Bear's comments the day after the op-ed ran in the Tulsa World. I think that will answer your question. That is not the position of the Osage Nation. Go look at the press release that the Comanche Nation released after Governor Stitt tried to use this the last time. And I don't think Chairman Nelson sticks by that position. I haven't actually seen the letters. Letters can be produced in a variety of ways. Regardless of whatever position was articulated to the prior administration, no tribe is saying that right now. And the tribe I work for has never taken that position, nor has the majority of the tribes that are out there. The position has been consistent with the intent when the compact was entered, that it renews so long as certain preconditions are met.
But some tribes have changed their interpretation, is that right?
Yes, the letters were sent.
Do the tribes kind of pay the same with like the oil industry? Like he's wanting to bring other people to the oil. Does the oil kind of?
Well, it's interesting.
pay
When
same?
the rate that the tribes pay is really gross. We pay that sliding scale 4 to 6 on electronic games, 10% on table games. The only thing we get to deduct from that is the wins that we pay out. So other businesses say corporate income tax. Businesses have myriad deductions or expenses that they can count against their tax liabilities and thus get a lower effective rate. At the Chickasaw Nation, our effective rate under the compact is about 6.5%. Those numbers I went through with you before, too, about the $850 million adjusted for inflation that the state projected, the $1.6 billion that it's actually taken in. If you go back to 2004 and you actually knew what was going to happen, if the state really wanted to hit that $850 million mark, all it needed was a rate of 3.5%. But they don't. They have a rate of 6 to 10%. So they're doing pretty well under the compact. You look at what other states bring in terms of raw dollars, the only other state that has a higher, what's called coin in, where there's the amount of money that goes into the gaming product. The only other state where there's more money spent on gaming is California than Oklahoma. It's also the only other state that nets more through revenue share payments and gaming related income taxation. And I think the numbers in California are about 3.6 and here in Oklahoma it's 1.6. Look at that number through the lens of the relative populations of California versus Oklahoma. Per capita in California, they're getting about $90 per citizen of the state. Here in Oklahoma, it's closer to $407 per citizen. No other state pulls in numbers like that. So he wants to focus on the rate. We want to talk about the actual impact of what tribal gaming is having on Oklahoma's economy. And we're proud of that. We're glad to have that conversation. The state so far hasn't been interested in that.
Is this the first time he's mentioned 25% as starting point concessions?
That was in his initial op-ed. And he continues to mix commercial gaming tax rates with state tribal gaming compact rates. Today he's stuck more to the gaming compact rates, but again, there's only 14 compacts out of 306 in the country that have rates between 20 and 25%. So that's by far the exception. There's well over 100 compacts that have a revenue share rate of 0. One might ask, why would a state enter into a compact with a tribe that provided for 0 revenue share? Well, why do states create tax incentives to get Google or Amazon to build their factories or their warehouses within their jurisdictions? The revenue share is really the smallest amount of the impact of tribal gaming. The indirect impacts, the nearly $13 billion impacts of tribal activities here in Oklahoma, that's the real payday for the state. So for other states, they've been willing to have a 0% revenue share because they see tribal economic development as putting people to work, creating other revenue streams that benefit the state, and otherwise enhance the quality of lives for all of those folks. The tribes themselves are not Oklahoma citizens. The tribal leaders are. Most Oklahoma citizens, or most tribal citizens, are also Oklahoma citizens. There's no room for adversarialness in this relationship. This is really a family squabble. And we need to get over what I'm going to refer to as the nonsense of this renewal issue, so we can really work together to figure out how to continue to make Oklahoma a top 10 state when it comes to gaming. Because by the way, we're number 3 in the country, and that's not tribal gaming, that's gaming period. We're already there. So instead of singling out the tribes as somehow not paying their fair share based on cherry-picked numbers, we would rather sit down with state partners and figure out how we go to the next level. How do we continue to move this forward? Governor Stitt would find very willing partners, even now, within the tribal leaderships.
Kansas model real quick. I need to talk about that as you go by the Kansas RC the other day. Don't they have to pay for regulation? Or I'm sorry, that's the wrong one.
Right. Well, under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, under federal law in general, tribes are prohibited from taxing. States are prohibited from taxing tribes. IGRA does allow for states to assess fees to offset direct regulatory costs associated with compact administration and compliance. So there is, and our compact has that. I think it's some about $500,000 or something like that. The revenue share rate is a distinct animal. And as Mr. Morgan pointed out, That's a bargain for a transaction. The state is essentially selling exclusivity to the tribes, and the tribes are paying for it through sharing a portion of the revenues. Where you see compacts that have zero revenue share, there still might be some kind of regulatory fee, but they haven't sold exclusivity to the tribes.
At Kansas.
There's several states that have that, Minnesota being one.